Hi Year 6, I am Mr. Roberts and I am a Raising Standards leader and a PE teacher. Really looking forward to meeting everyone, and I hope there's some sports stars within you all. I am tasked with reading you chapter 11, so if you get your textbooks out and read along. Okay. Alex burst out of the house and stopped in the open air, taking stock of his surroundings. He was aware of alarms ringing, guards running toward him, and two cars still some distance away, tearing up the main drive, heading for the house. He just hoped that although it was obvious something was wrong, nobody would yet know what it was. They shouldn't be looking for him, at least not yet. That might give him the edge. It looked like he was too late. Sale's private helicopter had already gone. Only the cargo plane was left. If Alex was going to reach the Science Museum in London in the 50 minutes left to him, he had to be on it. But the cargo plane was already in motion, rolling slowly away from its chocks. In a minute or two it would go through the pre-flight tests, then it would take off. Alex looked around and saw an open-topped army jeep parked on the drive near the front door. There was a guard standing next to it, a cigarette slipping out of his hand, looking around to see what was happening but looking the wrong way. Perfect. Alex sprinted across the gravel. He had brought a weapon from the house. One of Sale's harpoon guns had floated past him just as he left the room, and he'd snatched it up, determined at last to have something he could use to defend himself. It wouldn't be easy enough to shoot the guy right now. A harpoon in the back, and the jeep would be his. But Alex knew he couldn't do it. Whatever Alan Blunt and MI6 wanted to turn him into, he wasn't ready to shoot in cold blood. Not for his country, not even to save his own life. The guard looked up as Alex approached and fumbled for the pistol in a holster at his belt. He never made it. Alex used the handle of the harpoon gun, swinging it around and up to hit him hard under the chin. The guard crumpled, the pistol falling out of his hand. Alex grabbed it and leaped into the jeep, grateful to see the keys were in the ignition. He turned them and heard the engine start up. He knew how to drive. That was something else Ian Ryder had made sure he'd learned, as soon as his legs were long enough to reach the pedals. The other cars were closing in on him. He must have seen him attack the guard. Meanwhile, the plane had wheeled around and was already taxiing it up to the start of the runway. He wasn't going to reach it in time. Maybe it was the danger closing in from all sides that had sharpened his senses. Maybe it was his close escape from so many dangers before. But Alex didn't have time to think. He knew what to do, as if he'd done it a dozen times before. Maybe the training he'd been given had been more effective than he thought. He reached into his pocket and took out the yo-yo that Smithers had given him. There was a metal stud on the belt he was wearing, and he slammed the yo-yo against it, feeling it click into place as he'd been designed to. Then, as quickly as he could, he tied the end of the nylon cord around the bolt of the harpoon. Finally, he tucked the pistol he had taken from the guard into the back of his trousers. He was ready. The plane was facing down the runway. Its propellers were all at full speed. Alex wrenched the gear into first, released the handbrake, and gunned the jeep forward, shooting over the drive and onto the grass, heading for the airstrip. At the same time, there was a chatter of a machine gun fire. He yanked down on the steering wheel and twisted away as his wing mirror exploded and a spray of bullets slammed into the windshield of the door. The two cars that he had seen coming up the main drive had wheeled around to come up behind him. Each of them had a guard in the back seat leaning out the window, firing at him. They were getting closer. Alex tried to go faster, but it was already too late. The two cars had reached him, and for a horrible second he found himself sandwiched between them, one on each side. He was only inches away from the guards. Looking left and right, he could see into the barrels of their machine guns. There's only one thing to do. He slammed his foot on the brake, ducking at the same time. The jeep skidded into a halt, and the other two cars flashed past him. There was a chatter as both machine guns opened fire. Alex looked up. The two guards had squeezed their triggers simultaneously. They had both been aiming at him. But with the jeep suddenly out of their sights, they had ended up firing at each other. There was a yell. One of the cars had lost control and crashed into a tree, metalwork crumpling against wood. The other screeched to a halt, reversed, then turned to come after him. Alex slammed the car back into first gear and set off again. Where was the plane? With a groan, he he saw that it had begun rolling down the runway. It was still moving slowly, but was rapidly picking up speed. Alex hit the tarmac and followed. His foot was pressed down, the gas pedal against the floor. The Jeep was doing about 70, but it wasn't fast enough. And straight ahead of him, the way was blocked. 2 more cars had arrived on the runway. More guards with machine guns balanced themselves, half leaning out the windows. They had a clear shot. There was nothing to stop them from hitting him, unless... He turned the steering wheel and yelled out as the Jeep spun across the runway behind the plane. Now he had the plane between him and the approaching cars. He was safe, but only for a few more seconds. The plane was about to leave the ground. Alex saw the front wheel separate itself from the runway. He glanced in his mirror. The car had chased him from the house, was right on its tail. He had nowhere left to go. 1 car behind him, 2 more ahead. The plane was now in the air, the back wheels lifting off, the guards taking aim, everything at 70 miles an hour. Alex let go of the steering wheel, grabbed the harpoon gun and fired. The harpoon flashed through the air. The yo-yo attached to Alex's belt spun, trailing around 30 yards of specially designed advanced nylon cord. The pointed head of the harpoon buried itself in the underbelly of the plane. Alex felt himself almost being torn in half as he was yanked out of the Jeep on the end of the cord. In seconds he was 40, 50 yards above the runway, dangling underneath the plane. His Jeep swerved out of control. The 2 oncoming cars tried to avoid it and failed. Both of them hit in a 3-way head-on collision. There was an explosion, a ball of flame, and a fist of grey smoke that followed Alex up as he tried trying to seize him. A moment later, there was another explosion. The 3rd car had been travelling too fast. It ploughed into the burning wrecks, flipped over, and continued screeching along the runway on its back before it burst into flame. Alex saw little of this. He was suspended underneath the plane by a single thin white cord, twisting around and around as he was carried even farther into the air. The wind was rushing past him, battering his face and deafening him. He couldn't even hear the propellers. Just above his head, the belt was cutting into his waist. He could hardly breathe. Desperately, he scrambled for the yo-yo and found the control he wanted, a single button. He pressed it, and the tiny, powerful motor inside the yo-yo began to turn. The yo-yo rotated on his belt, pulling in the cord very slowly, an inch at a time. Alex was drawn up toward the plane. He had aimed the harpoon accurately. There was a door at the back of the plane, and when he turned off the engine mechanism in the yo-yo, he was close enough to reach out for the handle. He wondered who was flying the plane and where he was going. The pilot must have seen the destruction down on the runway, but he couldn't have heard the harpoon. He couldn't know he'd picked up an extra passenger. Opening the door was harder than Alex thought. He was still dangling under the plane, and every time he got close to the handle, the wind drove him back. The current was tearing into his eyes, and Alex could hardly see. Twice his fingers found the metal handle, only to be pulled away before he could turn it. The 3rd time he managed to get a better grip, but it still took all his strength to yank the handle down. The door swung open, and he clambered into the hold. He took one last look down. The runway was already 1,000 feet below. There were 2 fires raging, but at this distance they seemed no more than match heads. Alex unplugged the yo-yo, freeing himself. Then he reached into the waistband of his trousers and took out the gun. The plane was empty apart from a couple of bundles that Alex vaguely recognised. There was a single pilot at the controls, and something on his instrumentation must have told him that the door was open, because he suddenly twisted around. Alex found himself face to face with Mr. Grin. "Wog," the butler muttered. Alex raised the gun. He wondered if he would have the courage to use it, but he wasn't going to let Mr. Grin know that. "All right, Mr. Grin," he shouted above the noise of the propeller and the howl of the wind. "You may not be able to talk, but you better listen. I want you to fly this plane to London. We're going to the Science Museum in South Kensington, and we've got to be there less than an hour. And if you think you're going to trick me, I'll put a bullet in you. Do you understand? Mr. Grin said nothing. Alex fired the gun. The bullet slammed into the floor just beside Mr. Grin's foot. Mr. Grin stared at Alex, then nodded slowly. He reached out and turned the joystick. The plane dipped and began to head north. Okay guys, that is chapter 11. You guys now have a few tasks to complete. I hope you enjoyed it, and once again I really look forward to seeing you all in hopefully September. Thank you, bye.